Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri, USPIE's weekly podcast that empowers parents to reclaim their children's education from government bureaucrats and social engineers. In each episode, Sheri delivers the latest news from the front lines of the fight for the minds of the next generation, equipping you with the tools and resources needed to join the cause.
Hi everyone, welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri. I'm your host, Sheri, and I have a great show for you. Joining me today is another star of our documentary film, Truth and Lies in American Education, Sam Sorbo. Sam is best known as an actress and the wife of actor Kevin Sorbo, but she is also an author and homeschool advocate, and we're going to be talking about some of the latest education news, and in particular, the growth of the homeschooling movement in America. Before I bring her on, do me a favor and give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to the show. And be sure to visit USPIE.org to learn more and join the movement.
Today's episode is brought to you by U.S. parents involved in education. USPIE's mission is to empower parents and local communities to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. For more insights from U.S. parents involved in education, connect with us at USPIE on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit USPIE.org.
Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri. My guest today is Sam Sorbo, an education freedom advocate on a mission to help parents and children break free from the modern school education system. A Hollywood actress, writer, and producer, Sam stepped away from her career to dedicate over a decade to homeschooling her 3 children. Through this experience, she recognized the limitations of institutional education and discovered that learning goes far beyond academics. As a prolific author, podcast, and radio host, international speaker, and mentor, Sam teaches families to, in her words, educate differently. Now, after graduating her youngest child, Sam reflects on years of commitment to her children's education, knowing that they are fully prepared for the future. Sam Sorbo, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for that lovely introduction. And it's true. I was remarking on this today, as I actually often do, because I speak and I try to convince parents that they don't actually know what they're missing out on. That we've been sold a bill of goods. It's not an education system. It is a school system. It's a system of schooling, but it doesn't educate, and we're seeing that more and more. And yet, for some reason, because we all went to school for 13 years and were indoctrinated to think school good, we somehow think that we should try to fix the schools so that they do better. But even their best, Sheri, will never beat home education. It can't. It can't.
That's such a profound message and needs to be talked about. And so I'm so glad that you're doing this work and educating, if you will, not schooling, but educating parents and others to the importance of what a true education looks like and the best education.
If you don't mind, let me start here because this is fresh in my mind, and I was just talking about it with a friend of mine and my kids. And we were remarking that the teachers in schools often become like the parents of the children who are their students. And my daughter was saying that she was speaking to a friend who said, well, it was my teacher's birthday, so I made him this card and I bought him this little gift and I did this thing. And her response was, that should be reserved for your parent, not for your that just seems odd. And so I mentioned, because I have the viewpoint from experience that teenagers don't rebel, which of course gets a lot of pushback because the paradigm is, of course, teenagers rebel. That's just normal behavior. No, that's normal behavior for children who grew up in schools. That's normal behavior only because they went to schools. And so my teenagers, and I had 3 of them at the same time, they never rebelled. And my son looked at me and he goes, I didn't rebel, did I? And I'm like, no, you didn't, because there was nothing really for you to rebel against. You grew up with my values. And the reason you grew up with my values is no one eclipsed my values. No one came between you and me and our values, which the school necessarily does. It it comes between the child and the parent. The school becomes the alternate authority. And in that authority, it happens to often challenge the parent's authority, which sets up this conundrum in the child as he grows to finally realize, mom and dad just don't know that much. And I ought to challenge them because I'm learning so much in school that clearly they can't teach me. We've put this on ourselves. We brought it into our homes. And my friend said to me, but what about the parents? You can't, do you have to hold the parents somewhat accountable? And I say, I don't actually, because the parents went to school, which means that they weren't really parented. None of us have been really parented if we went to school for those 16,000 hours of school that we endured outside of our family unit, right? And so I don't lay the blame on the parents. They've been sold a bill of goods. We all have. The school said to the parent, don't worry about the education of the child. We'll take care of that. You butt out, and we will hand you back a fully formed human being that is fully educated, which of course they can't do and they don't do. But somehow we're still expecting them to perform to some standard that they themselves set, and it's wrong. And so I don't hold the parent. They are responsible, but they can't be held accountable because they were seduced into this paradigm like we all were. And so they sent their child off to the schools with the thought, the school is handling the education of the child. Now, the school used to say, we will handle the education of the child. And by the way, education is defined as academics, which it shouldn't be. That's the wrong definition, but that's the working definition that we have. That's why we conflate schools with education. But education is so much more than academics, Sheri. Mm-hmm. And in fact, and I just heard this from Marissa Streit, who is the CEO of PragerU. And so I have to give her credit, although pretty soon I'm just going to own it myself, but I have to give her credit still. What's the limit? Like you can use something 3 times and then you can own it or whatever. Anyway, she believes you can't teach academics without character first. So character ought to come first and then the academics will follow. And I think she's absolutely right. Because if you teach a child why they are important and how they are important and what values they need to have in order to maintain that level of importance and, like honesty and goodness and those virtues, right? If you train a child in those virtues, then he can't help but do the studies that you put in front of him because he honors you by doing those studies. He shows respect, and he will be interested because he understands that there's like a meta narrative to life. We deny children that in schools. We don't teach morality in school. Well, we don't teach true morality in school. And so what we're doing is we're sort of cutting these kids loose into this sort of vapid sea of information, none of which is interesting for them. And then we browbeat them into like learning it with actually no explanation as to why it's important. And in fact, most people, you would struggle for them to give you a reason for why the Pythagorean theorem is important to them today, right? And so we have this whole, it's completely mixed up because we have lost the actual definition of education. And yes, the parents should be responsible for much of the education of a child, but we've told them, don't worry about it, send your child to school. And so while the child is being schooled unsuccessfully, right, in academics, because let's face it, the schools are failing, the parents are thinking, my child is being educated. And so none of that is true. Now what we have is we have a good portion of people, it's not a majority yet, but a good portion of people who are saying, the system is rigged against us. And I don't want my child exposed to all of whatever they have going on over there. So I'm just going to try to go it on my own and see if I can make it work, which is where I was when my son went through 2nd grade. I just gave up. I was like, they are not accomplishing education. At least at that point, my definition of education was purely academic. But I did understand that there were other things that he needed to learn that I was actually involved in teaching him anyway. And so I was like, well, if they're not doing the academics and that's what they're supposed to do, then I'll just try doing the academics. And if I fail, and this is what I said to Kevin, If I fail at homeschooling him, which by my metric was, if I fail at getting him the academics, he'll still be better off because he'll be a good person. Because I will teach my son values and constancy and understanding and forgiveness, and I will show him how to ask for forgiveness. Those are important values to have a successful life. They're not values that are taught in the school. And so I just pulled him out of school and I said, well, sink or swim, at least I'll have enough influence over my child that he will end up being an adult, a successful adult, and success defined as happy and able to provide service to others. Very, very loosely, that's how we ought to be defining success. Personally, as a Christian, that his soul is saved, that I know he's going to heaven, all of that good stuff. But even if you're not a Christian, like, you want your children to be successful in terms of being happy individuals who are well-adjusted, right? And we're not getting that out of our schools. And so, parents need to sort of wake up and smell the coffee and understand that they are fully equipped to do that much. And if they do that much, because that actually is the character component, what I discovered in the over 10 years that I home educated my children, and it took me a while to discover this, if you handle the character building part, the rest follows. And this is in the Bible. God knows this. That's why God says, teach them my words, teach them diligently. When you walk by the by, when you lie down to sleep, like, your job as a parent is to always be teaching the child the law. God's words are the law, the 10 commandments, the do unto others as you would have done unto you. That's a big, big umbrella law that takes time and commitment to teach a child. But when you teach them truth, then you set them on a path to desire to discover the truth. And if you can do that for your child and show your child how to learn, how to discover truth, how to go find information, then you set them free. Then they can do that for the rest of their lives. And then it doesn't matter what the world throws at them, because they know how to succeed, both as a human being and as a production plant, as somebody who can actually perform services for other people and enact in trade and become a meaningful member of society. And that's really what we ought to be focused on, which we're not, right? Right now, we're focused a lot on school choice.
Okay, wow, that was awesome. I love the way you laid that out. And it just gives people so much to think about, because you're right. It's not education. And it needs to be more than just academics. And so you also pointed out the fact that it separates the current school system in our country, separates children from their parents' values. And you know that dates all the way back to Horace Mann. That was actually, I'll paraphrase a quote that I read by him, that was the intentional agenda of shifting the government schools way back then, was to separate children from their parents' values. We also have had another guest on our show, Bernadette Broyles, and she was also in our film, Truth and Lies in American Education. And she was so insistent when we interviewed her for the film that she would be able to bring out that point, because her expertise is in the area of the transgender ideology and all of that nonsense that's being forced on children in schools. And so she said that it is an intentional agenda to drive a wedge between children and their families. So there you have it. You're right on with that. And our viewers and our listeners really need to understand that that's fundamental to everything else that we're talking about today. U.S. Parents Involved in Education advocates for parental sovereignty, but unlike many who support government-sponsored school choice, USPIE believes that parents who take money from government programs like education savings accounts and other voucher schemes are in fact surrendering their educational freedom, because all government programs are regulated. According to the Cato Institute, regulations only tend to increase with expanded use over time. In most states, private and home schools have very limited regulation, giving maximum freedom to parents to choose educational options free from harmful content. We at USPIE are glad to see momentum growing in the education freedom movement, but the current money follow the child approach is flawed and must be reconsidered. Go to uspie.org to find the details of our proposal for enabling parental choice free from government intrusion. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. parents involved in education and connect with us at USPIE on X and Facebook. Let's go back to the beginning for you, for when you first got started. And I'm going to show you a clip from our film, Truth and Lies in American Education, of which you were one of the stars. And after we hear the clip, I'd like to hear your response to that.
What's your goal? What do you want for your child? Because the school's goal is different, almost guaranteed, than what your goal is. They say their goal is college prep and career readiness. So by their own admission, they're most interested in making a worker bee out of your little guy or girl. Well, that's not what I want for my child. I want my child to be filled with joy. I want my child to learn to serve God and serve others around him. I don't think the public schools have that goal at all for my child.
Why and when did you decide to homeschool?
So it's a kind of a funny story the way I got started. It's actually in my book. My son was turning in a book report every month, and I never got them back graded. And I was in the classroom a lot. You know, I showed up and I took the kids to the library, or I helped the teacher grade some paperwork, or I'd help clean up after class. I taught art in the classroom. I mean, I was an involved parent. And I never saw a book report back. And so one day I was helping the teacher sort of tidy up after class, and I said to her, "How are Braden's book reports?" And without batting an eye, she said, "Oh, not very good." And I said, I thought she was joking. I'm like, "Really? What do you mean?" "Oh, not very good at all. No, he really needs to work on them." I mean, I talked to her several times a week. Like, this was a big letdown. And despite that, I said, okay, I got to hunker down. We need to do book report. Every day after school, we did book report. Sit down, read the chapter, write out the line. And the book report form was kind of dumb, I thought. But we did it, you know? So the next book report we turned in was like, awesome. And I thought, I'm homeschooling. I'm just doing it at the end of the day when everybody's tired and cranky and hungry. And when I realized that, I took a little bit of the pressure off of myself, and I talked to my husband. I said, I think I want to look at home education, and I'll just do it till December. Just want to try it for a semester. Let's just give it a shot and see where it takes us.
I love that story. And you know that it was such an encouragement to April, who was my daughter-in-law and interviewed you in that segment. And she read your book and decided for herself that it was absolutely what she had to do with her children.
Well, I mean, you know, I'd love to say that I never looked in the rearview mirror or I never turned back. It's not true, because I was filled with self-doubt. And so I want to point out to parents, first of all, you know, we ended the clip with me saying, I'll do it till December. I'm going to give it 4 months, you know. I gave it a year and a half. And in the spring of the following, the next year, right, I decided that I was just failing. I was just failing. Now, why did I think I was failing? The only reason that I thought I was failing is because the schools train us to think that we can't do anything that we didn't get an A+, you know, grade for. And if you really impeach like your thoughts about yourself, I would venture to guess that you would find that to be the truth. I speak 5 languages. I went to Duke University and I studied biomedical engineering, and I still felt incapable of teaching a 4th grader and a 2nd grader. And so when Braden was in 4th grade, Shane was in 2nd grade. Over Christmas, now Shane was my math kid. He loved math. So his first grade math workbook was finished on Halloween of his 1st grade year. That's end of October. He finished that book like that. He loved it. By the time he was in 2nd grade, he was in 4th grade math because he loved it. And why hold him back? That's what homeschooling is all about. Like, the freedom to learn at your own pace is one of the things that home education is all about. But he wasn't reading. And so over Christmas, I forced him to do 2 reading lessons a day. And he was just stuttering along, reading very haltingly, let's say. And so by the time, I guess it was probably February, it took me a little while to get all my ducks in a row, but I called the school and I decided to enroll him in this little tiny private school. And it was a hybrid program. So I was to do 2 days of work with them and then of homeschool, and then 3 days they would be in the little school, if I remember correctly. I brought him in to start they ran in 6-week increments. And so, okay, I brought him in. And the headmistress said, well, let me test him and see where he is. Because I said to her, he's really advanced in math, but his reading is atrocious. And don't hit the messenger. I did the very best that I could. I just can't do it. Obviously I'm a failure. Although why I thought I was a failure is just because he wasn't reading that well as a second grader. I don't know what I was expecting, because she came back and she said, okay, I tested him. So he's in second grade, right? I said, yes. She said, well, he's doing math at a fourth grade level. And I'm like, yep, that stands to reason. I get it. Perfect. She goes, but he's reading at a fifth grade level. And I literally looked at her and I said, so I'm the one with the problem? And she goes, yeah, And I was like, wow. And it didn't compute. It did not get through my sense of ability. So I left them there. I continued with the plan of, you guys are the experts. You can do this better than I, the parent, who knows my children the best. That's a lie. So I'm saying it out loud because I want people to understand the metrics that are involved, the paradigms that are involved, right? Somehow these complete strangers will be better at instructing your child than you. It's just a non-truth. It's misinformation. It's malinformation, if you want to use these new technical terms that we have for lies. And so I left them there for 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks of sort of stopping and starting, because, as the parent, I was supposed to download homework and we would do the work together. It was the home version of the school. So I was homeschooling those days. Well, oftentimes I couldn't download the work. So I'd call the teacher and I'd say, there's something with the website. How can I get the work? She would say, oh, don't worry about it. That doesn't fly with me. No, you gave me work to do with my child. I'm here to do the work. Why can't I and so I got frustrated, and I finally realized, close to 4 weeks in, I guess, I realized that they were back on the treadmill, that they were learning at the same pace as all the other children. This probably just wasn't the best thing for them. And gosh darn it, I did teach Shane to read at the 5th grade level when he was in 2nd grade. So I can't be all that bad. And I missed them. I missed my kids. I wanted them home. So I really started reproaching myself, what have you done? And I finally, week number, at the beginning of their 6th week, I was like, do you guys not want to go? And they were like, yes, mommy, we don't want to go. Like that. Yes, absolutely. I'm like, okay, at the end of this week, it'll be your last day. And I picked them up. And then Monday, I put math in front of my son, Shane, and he started to cry. And he said, no, mommy, I can't do it. I can't do it. It's too hard. Now those words had never come out of his mouth before. So he was parroting something that he heard in the classroom. And my heart broke because he was my math boy. And I'm a math person. So that was our connection. So I really, really loved that for him. And my heart broke, and I took the math book away, before it could do more damage or whatever. And I put it aside for a week. And then the following Monday, I took it out and I turned back a couple chapters and I said, let's try this one. And he just hunkered down and did it right away. No problem. And I never figured out what the hiccup was for him. But for me, it was this heart-wrenching moment that I had somehow, in the quest to do what was best for my child, I had injured him. And I used to speak about this in speeches that I would give, just to try to give parents some color and clarity on the different tides that are involved in home education, the different movements that happen as you go through this. You're not going to get everything right. You're going to do some things wrong, but they'll be yours. They'll be under your control. And hopefully you'll be able to identify the things that you do wrong in time to mitigate the damage, right? But if someone else does something wrong, like teach your son that math is hard, which they do every day in school, every single day, the message is, this is hard. This is very hard. Only a few people can really do this properly, and you're probably not one of them. That's the message in school. You can't mitigate for that. Not on a daily basis. You can't do it. And so I used to tell people this story, and I had somebody come up to my book table after I was speaking, and she said to me, hey, I just wanted to say to you, isn't it beautiful that God allowed you to make that little mistake to prove to you that you're enough?
Mm.
And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, because really the damage was immediately undone. The following week, the damage was done, like gone. And yes, isn't that fabulous that I had those 6 weeks to literally prove to myself? Because clearly somebody telling me that my son was advanced wasn't enough to prove to me that I was getting the job done. Yay. I had that opportunity to actually, personalize it and take it in and understand it from a visceral reaction. I thought that I had done like the worst thing ever. What I had actually done was the best thing that I could possibly do for myself as my children's mentor. And I want parents to understand, when you become your child's teacher, you're not a teacher. Not in the traditional school sense of the word, because being a teacher is not a good place to be for the child. You do not want your child to grow up and think, I need a teacher to teach me everything that I need to know. I need an expert to trust, because that's what that translates into when you're an adult. We have just gone through a whole season of trust the experts, and we have been severely disappointed by those so-called experts. And so you don't want your child to think there is an expert, there is a teacher. So rather than thinking of yourself as the child's teacher, which doesn't mean you don't teach your child certain things, obviously, but let's call you the navigator or the mentor. And in fact, I am now my children's mentor because they're adults. They still come to me for advice, but I'm not teaching them. I'm just mentoring them, which is almost the same thing, right? But if you think about it in different terms, it should appear to you differently, and it'll take the onus off, because when we think of teachers, we think of experts, right? We think of somebody who has all the knowledge and they are the spigot. And, somebody turns on the spigot and then you get information. But if that spigot isn't turned on, you just don't know anything. It's the false paradigm. That's one of the lies that exist within our school paradigm that we really need to disclose, put into the sunlight so that we can dispel it. And that's basically what my work is about these days, is trying to dispel the lies that we've all imbibed from our school days, that are actual lies.
That is so well said. And, it kind of reminds me of when I went to the State House to testify against the Common Core standards about 15 years ago. So there were a lot of teachers there, that came for the same reason, except to testify in favor of these faulty standards. So I'm at the table signing in to speak, and of course they didn't know who I was or that I wasn't a teacher. And it was a couple of young teachers, and they were talking among themselves, and one said to the other, I think if you're not a teacher, you shouldn't have any say in this matter. And so when it was my turn to speak, I brought that up. And I said, herein lies the problem. These teachers think they know best. They are the quote unquote experts, as you would call them. And they have no concern whatsoever about how a parent might feel or think about the education their children are receiving. So you really nailed that. And I want to talk to you a little more about what I was going to call homeschooling, but since I've learned from you, I'm going to call it home education. So I understand that vernacular. And just as I've tried to encourage other people to say government schools instead of public schools, because that's
Right.
what they are. So we know that home education has grown immensely in the last few years, especially after the COVID lockdowns. And according to the National Home Education Research Institute, from 2016 to 2021, homeschooling in the US saw a big jump from 2.3 million kids in 2016 to 3.7 million by 2021. So it's really, I think, what I've heard, the latest statistics were that it's basically doubled in just the last few years. Beyond the statistics, there seems to be a paradigm shift taking place in America when it comes to education.
There's definitely a paradigm shift. I spoke to a group yesterday. Was it yesterday? About home education, and there was a good number of people who were like, "Yes, we love home education," and it didn't used to be that way. So there's definitely been a paradigm shift. Parents are much more receptive to it. It's lost a bit of the tarnish that it carried with it, that only weirdos were homeschooled, right? And that, by the way, that was earned. I don't dispel that, because at the time, back when homeschooling wasn't legal in every state, uh, there was a time when it wasn't. And the parents who homeschooled were the parents of the kids who were too weird to be able to fit in. And they were, bullied ruthlessly, or they just couldn't fit in. And so they were weirdos, right? Nothing personal, but I'm just saying, like, the majority of them were odd, because they couldn't fit in. That's why they were home educated. But fast forward to today, there are a lot of actors who home educate their children because they can't keep up with the school schedule and the work schedule that these young actors are pursuing, or professional horse people, or I suppose professional is the wrong word, but ice skaters, or people that are pursuing other interests. And so in that respect, I think, and the fact that homeschooling has grown by leaps and bounds, we've shed the negative connotations of home educated children. The other thing is, when you meet a home educated child, and you're more likely to meet one today than you were 20 years ago, you will likely notice how poised they are, how well spoken they are. So I was just at an event, and there was a young woman there, and I met her and her sister, and I was like, oh, I talked to her briefly, and she just was like, well, this and that and the other thing. And oh, yes, very interested, very personable, very conversational. And I walked away. I ran into her later at the event, and I said, excuse me, can I just ask you, how old are you? And she said, 15.
Mm.
And I said, are you home educated? She said, oh, yes, I just graduated high school. She was very proud of the fact that she just graduated high school, and rightly so. And it was so evident that she was home educated. And the reason for that is, when your child is not surrounded by only children their own age, or other children who are ageist because the schools themselves teach ageism, your child will just necessarily learn social skills from other adults, because that's how children learn social skills. So this whole argument of, well, what about socialization, is so absurd, because school is the last place that children should try to learn to socialize. They're supposed to be sitting in class not talking to each other. So I don't know what you're smoking, thinking that somehow children learn to socialize from other children, their peers in school, because that in and of itself is ridiculous. It's like, well, how's my child going to learn math if my child doesn't go to school and learn from the other children in the math class? No, it doesn't happen that way. And they don't teach classes in socialization. So why you think a child is educated socially in school is absurd. So the problem is that we have all of these lies that have been pervasive basically in our culture, which is why we have embraced school. We've been taught to love school, and the lies have just sort of come along for the ride, and we don't even know that they're there. So there's the lie that we talked about already, that learning is hard. And it's a terrible thing to teach a child that learning is hard, because first of all, it's a lie. And secondly, their whole goal as children is to learn. Children only want to learn. That's why they always ask questions. And so sending them to school, for instance, is a terrible thing because the first thing they learn in school is to not ask questions, to sit down and shut up. And if they have a question, they first need permission to ask the question, which is so awful to train a child in. And, I do get pushback on that because parents are like, but Sam, how can you keep control of the classroom if you don't have the children raise their hand? Well, guess what? As a home educator, you don't need control of the classroom. You teach your children to expect each other, to respect each other, to not interrupt each other, and to sandwich their question in when there's a pause in the conversation, right? Or to, respectfully say, excuse me, and then say their piece. But you don't teach them, no, you be quiet until I'm ready to, consider whether you get an answer to your question, which is sort of what the schools do. But there are lots of other lies. And so I will give a shameless plug for my book. This is called The Parent's Guide to Homeschool. And this is actually training for the parent, which is, my interest is to empower parents so that they can take care of the education of their children. And the first chapter literally is called School Lies. So, and there are so many of them. So, let's see. School lies. Hold on. I want to find some of these. The 3 foundational lies are that you have to raise your hand, which is don't ask. The raise your hand really boils down to don't ask. The second one is that failure is bad, right? So anytime a child fails, they get the red F with the circle around it. The class titters because the class sees, oh, so-and-so failed the test, the pop quiz, whatever it is. And so failure is bad. Well, that's a lie because failure is one of the best things you can do. Thomas Edison said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I found 10,000 different ways to not invent the light bulb. And that's the way that we ought to be looking at failure. In fact, I had a friend whose dad used to ask her when she came home every day from school, because she still went to school for some reason. He said, how did you fail today? And then they would celebrate that because it meant that she tried something that she couldn't do. And that's important. You have to be trying things that you can't do or you can't ever grow, right? So that's failure is bad. Then the next one is don't think. That's another one of these things that we learn in school because the teacher has all the answers and the teacher does not want you to question her answers. She wants you to regurgitate her answers on the exam, which is to say, just give her back what she gave you and don't think about it too much. Because if you find a flaw in anything that she says and you question her, you will be punished, most likely. Now, there's some really good teachers out there who appreciate being challenged, but for the most part, most teachers don't want you to challenge them. They don't want the extra work. They don't want the hassle. And then the socialization lie, I think we covered that enough. College prep and career readiness is another lie. That your entire value is tied into how much money you earn. That's what college prep and career readiness trains us to think. Now, they don't say it outright. They don't say it out loud that way, but we have to look behind what's going on and try to decipher. And this is another thing that we don't learn in school is this idea of I can't think of the word, but basically analyzing to figure things out. And so what is college prep and career readiness? We don't give it a second thought. That's normal. That's what everybody does. College prep and career readiness. Okay, so think about it for a minute. College prep is basically convincing you to go to college, right? And why? Well, it's for your own good because career readiness, you need a college degree in order to have a career. That's a lie. I'm sorry. That's a lie. You don't need a college degree to have a career. And I know too many people who didn't set foot in college or dropped out who have fabulous careers, make wonderful living. You certainly don't need a college degree to be an entrepreneur. Or to be a plumber for that matter. And so this idea that college prep and career readiness is the number one goal of our schools is training us to buy into an absolute lie. And career readiness, by the way, if you boil it down, it is training you to think that the career is more important than anything else, including relationship, which is very dangerous for humanity. And what is career? Well, if you boil it down, career isn't, oh, you'll be fulfilled. That's not what they mean by career, and we all know it. All they mean by career is the almighty dollar. That's all they mean. And so it trains the child to tie his self-worth or her self-worth into the money that he can earn or she can earn, which is a horrible thing to do to a young woman, incidentally, because there are many, 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 many young women who really aspire to become mothers. And what happens is they're derailed from their aspirational goals into this career goal. And then when they achieve a career goal and they decide to settle down and become a mom, they won't sacrifice their career for their children. And that's an awful thing. Brings me to another lie. I'll just get this one in before I turn it back over to you, Sheri, because this might be the worst lie of all. And that is the idea that sacrifice is always a net loss. Sacrifice is not a net loss. Sacrifice, when done voluntarily, is always a net gain. But when we think of sacrifice, we only think loss. And that's mostly due to our schools. It's now part of our culture, right? Everything that came from the schools has now been enveloped within our culture. But I will tell you that if you learn to sacrifice for others, you will be a much happier person. And so we ought to be training our children in the value of sacrifice, because you never will willingly give up something for something less than. You always give up something for something greater. Or why do you make the sacrifice? Don't be absurd.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education has been blowing the whistle on how public schools have become increasingly dangerous for children and hostile toward parents, especially when it comes to so-called sex education. State laws and school policies prevent staff from disclosing student gender confusion with parents. Judges rule against parents opting their children out of sexually explicit content. Scholastic, one of the world's largest publishers of children's books, has gone all in on gender ideology propaganda with a resource guide dispelling binary notions of biology. The UN and the World Health Organization, in partnership with the Bill Gates-funded Rutgers Foundation, are working on the sexualization of children worldwide. Sexualizing children is evil and intentional and must be stopped. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education, and connect with us at USPIE on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org. What you just shared with us is truly amazing. I think it's unconventional thinking, but it's the kind of thinking that we all need to consider. And so there were a couple of things that you mentioned. One of them was the emphasis on college and career. And so that was one of the things I learned early on that was a big problem with the schools in America. You recall, I met you, I think, or maybe we didn't meet, but we both attended the educational policy conferences in St. Louis. I believe you were a speaker there one time when I was there. So that was one of the big things that Donna Hearn pointed out and explained to everybody, because when she was in the Reagan administration and worked at the Department of Education, she uncovered the government scheme to try to control the economy through America's schools. So everything became this school to work, workforce development model of education. And it is still there today. And in fact, I read Linda McMahon, the new education secretary's statement to her new staff today. And at the end, she talks about, preparing children for the careers and workforce. And I thought, oh boy, she's got a tough job ahead of her. She's got some really great directives from the president that you and I both agree on. I know you're going to have an opportunity to meet with her, but that's something that people are still so clueless about, is the fact that it is an intentional scheme on behalf of the government to try to control the economy and do it through our children. So I agree with you and appreciate you sharing all of that. And then one other quick point I wanted to make was what you said about women and women that want to be moms, stay-at-home moms, and educate their children and take care of their family like they used to do when I was growing up. My mother was what they called a stay-at-home mom. And when my children were young, I remember being looked down upon for being a stay-at-home mom. I was just a stay-at-home mom. And so people would ask, What do you do, when you'd engage in conversation? And I would say it and almost felt ashamed. So I'm so glad that women are recognizing the most valued role that they have in their lives, which is being a mother and raising their children and taking care of their families. So thank you for sharing that so eloquently. So let's talk a little bit about another topic that I know you and I both agree on, and you are especially knowledgeable on this, and that is the latest scheme. And I can't say latest because it's actually been the silver bullet for Republicans for as long as I've been involved in politics, was this idea of school choice.
Well, sure. I mean, President Trump is a big proponent of school choice because school choice is a very nebulous word. There's no actual definition of it. The best definition that we have today would be the money follows the child, but there are lots of different ways that the money could possibly follow the child. The struggle is we have school choice. We absolutely have school choice. So this idea that we're going to usher in this new era of school choice is absurd. That's how you know that they're pulling the wool over your eyes because the words sound so good. Yeah, they sound so good because we already have it. You can choose whatever school you want for your child. You do not have limitations of where you send your child to school, except perhaps your own finances. This is true. Okay. So that's where their version of this newfangled idea, it's not newfangled, but this idea of school choice comes from. Who's funding it? I don't know. I don't really care. What I want people to understand is you should have choice, and that choice should not be funded by the government. Because if the government funds your choice, the government will limit your choice at some point. That's the way government funding works. Now, there are a couple different parallels that we can draw. For instance, the government funded loans to college so kids could go to college. So more and more kids could go to college because somebody, we don't know who, produced this study that said that children who graduated college earned more money over their lifetimes, as if that's the metric of a successful life. But let's face it, we all went to school and we learned that money is the top value in this hierarchy that we are existing in today, which is very sad. And so then it became this big rush. Every child has to go to college, which is another lie. Every child absolutely should not go to college. Maybe the majority of children should not go to college. Now, the struggle that we have now is that high school doesn't prepare you for real life. But then again, college doesn't prepare you for real life either. So it's not like you're going to get better as you go to college. In fact, many children get worse as they go to college. They get more dependent, less self-sufficient as they go through college, more screwed up, let's just say, as they go through college. They learn more frivolous information that messes with them. And so college is actually now almost a detriment. There are employers who interview kids and sometimes even prefer the non-college educated child to the college educated young person because the one that went to college is not a creative thinker, cannot think outside the box, is overly trained in the wrong way. And so they prefer the youth that hasn't even attended college because they're going, well, this kid is actually so smart he didn't bother, which actually is probably a good thing. Let's take a risk on him. So that's the hot button issue. But if we just go back to this idea that the government came in and said, you know what, we're going to give you loans and we're going to lend you the money that you need to go to college. Well, what happened? Tuition rates spiked, which is, again, what we are seeing in the school choice programs that have already been implemented in various states in the United States. Tuition rates spiked. They actually outcompeted, what's the word? They outcompeted the market by like 75% inflation in college costs every decade, 75% a decade. So that's double or triple inflation for that period of time from, I believe it's the 1970s to the 2000s. So that's 4 decades of hyperinflation from when we started lending, the government started lending all this money to these kids. Now they're loans, but they are loans that the government is now considering forgiving, which means they're not really loans. It just gave them the money. Oh my gosh, that sounds just like school choice. And look what happened to our colleges. They're abysmal and they're worthless. Like a college degree is nearly worthless today. It used to be you needed a diploma. Now you need a diploma and a college degree, and it doesn't actually get you anywhere because they're both kind of worthless. So this idea that somehow we can usher in school choice, which is basically government funds just going out into the parental society of school-aged kids, is, and the idea that that will actually raise academic levels in children is like, where do you get that? There's a complete disconnect. Well, the parents will be able to choose the schools. No, it doesn't work that way. It's not, if you give me the money, then my child can go to a better school. If you give me the money and I send the money to that school will raise tuition rates. That's what's happened in Arizona. They've raised their tuition rates from about 25% to 50% just across the board. Some schools more, some schools less. But that means that the money that you get is worth a lot less than the dollar amount. And the other thing is, you can spend it on things. So initially they tried to sell us on it as no strings attached, because that was the one thing that conservatives were like, yeah, but I don't know if I want the government controlling that kind of, like, then the government can control me because, and so they're saying no strings attached. And I remember speaking to the lawmaker in Arizona. He was so proud of his ESAs that he helped usher in. And it was after I gave this long talk about how bad it was, not realizing that he was in the room. Yeah, obviously, like, not paying attention, because I don't. I speak truth. That's what I try to do. And if it disagrees with what you're operating under, then you are not operating under the truth. Sorry, sir. But I finished my whole diatribe, which you've just heard most of. And he goes, well, we've implemented ESAs and they've been very successful. And I'm like, well, define success, right? We need to define our terms, because we have lost the ability of discernment. That was the word I was looking for before. We have lost discernment because we are not taught in school how to discern. Now, that's a value that a parent ought to teach a child, but the parents have stopped teaching children because they think the schools are taking care of it. So we've lost discernment. So the idea is, it's been very successful. I was just in a debate with a young woman over school choice. She was very pro school choice. She said it's been so successful in every state that it's been tried. Define success, I said. The parents love it. Really fascinating. The parents love it when you write them a check? That's amazing. How is that successful for the academic outcomes of students? It's not. You are defining success completely devoid of any attachment to what our goal is. And I get very frustrated with people because she gets away with lying to the American public. I said, the problem is that there are strings on the money. And in fact, not all the money follows the child. In the state of Florida, the child gets, or the parents get $8,000, but it costs the state $16,000 to educate a child, to school a child, right? Where does the other $8,000 go? Nobody knows. Somebody gets it. We don't know. Don't ask. Take the $8,000. It's a bribe. Like, what are we thinking? And do you know what? I know two parents now in the state of Florida that got the money, and one woman bought her children a very, very large beanbag because that counts as educational. And another parent bought 2 flat screen TVs because that counts as educational. This is a disaster in the making. This is worse than USAID, because we are selling people this idea that your child will have a better life outcome if the government gives you money. And that's a lie. It is a lie from the pit of hell. And I hope that I've managed to prove it to you. But if that hasn't worked, then let's look at it this way. We have food stamps, do we not? And food stamps make people healthier, right? No. So why do you think that school choice is going to make children smarter? It doesn't work that way. You need discernment. Once you have discernment, you will see that it's a Trojan horse, and you have to look on the inside to see all the bad stuff that it will carry with it.
Amen, my friend. That was very well said.
Thank you. I'm very passionate about this. I'm
Yes,
very passionate.
yes.
Here's the thing. This is like the nut of the issue, but it's sort of so far down the road that people won't see it. But I'll share it with you anyway. we go down this road and the government starts funding individuals, which is always a bad idea, but it starts sending the money to individuals. And those individuals take the government money and go to private schools. Now those private schools are compromised because that money is still government money going to them. So all the private schools become government schools. We will lose our private institutions. We will lose them. Because the moment that the government comes over and says, hey, by the way, you have to teach DEI, right? Right now, we're in a phase of no more DEI, but that's an executive order that can be reversed on day one of the next administration if it goes the wrong way. So when the government comes back, which it will, because that's politics in America, it swings one way, it swings the other. The government comes back and says, you must teach these other things. Those schools won't give up the money. They will give up their ideology. But why will they give up their ideology? Because we all went to school and we learned that money is job number one. And we will all compromise, unless you are very thoughtful and very discerning. We will all compromise for the almighty dollar. We will all sell grandma for a buck because we have been schooled for 13 years to trust money over everything else, including relationship, including family, including your instincts. That's why young women who have children go back to work after 3 months, even though it rips their hearts out because they really want to stay with their baby. They value the dollar. They've been trained to value themselves over their relationship and their children. And it is the decimation of the family. It's the decimation of our entire way of life because our culture is based on family.
Yes, yes, you're so right. And let's talk about money for a minute. Another
Okay.
piece of this, okay? So I loved your example about Florida and how it costs 16,000 a year, and what happens to the other eight. So in my state of South Carolina, we recently passed. It's like an education savings account. It's totally government run, and it actually, they passed the same law last year, and it got booted out by our South Carolina Supreme Court because our Constitution says you can't use government money in private schools or something along those lines. So the Supreme Court shot it down. So they're determined to get this through. So they passed it this time saying we're going to use the lottery money to pay for this. So they're trying to tell us that the lottery money is not government money because taxpayers didn't pay it in unwillingly. But come on
Who
now.
runs the lottery, Sheri? Do you have a
And
private lottery in the state of what?
yes, so we have the lottery obviously is government, and the government controls the money, and they get to decide how to use it. So it's just a total sham. I'm sure our Supreme Court's going to shoot it down again. But beyond that, the system that they're talking about funding, okay, so you got this separate pot of lottery money, and then you've got this huge pot of government school money that they're already using and have been using, and they keep increasing and increasing. So now we're funding two systems. So it's not like when the government school's enrollment declines, they're not lowering their budget and shifting the
No.
money over here to these children. They keep all their money, and I've never known a school district or a school board or a teacher that didn't want more money. So they're not going to give up a dime of what they're already receiving. And so all of these quote unquote school choice projects around the country are funding a separate system. So now you're funding two systems of
Right.
education. So
Right.
taxpayers need to get a hold of that.
That's a really good point, that the school choice movement is actually more money in the long run. And it feeds right into this idea that you get 50 cents on the dollar. If they tried to sell it as you get 50 cents on the dollar, I think people might wise up a little bit, because that's what it is in the state of Florida. But of course, they're not going to pitch it that way. But I remember debating somebody, and I said, but I said to her, the problem is that all of the money doesn't follow the child. And her answer was, that's why we need more school choice, Sam, not less, more, because then all the money can follow the child. And I said, no, you just said there's accreditation and there's government regulations and there's government control over certain aspects, right? And she said, yes. I said, well, then all the money doesn't follow the child. Stop lying. I mean, stop lying. and it's all lies. And the reason that it's all lies is because none of it is about the education of children. That's the real problem. It's about schooling, but it's not really about the education of children, because when it comes down to it, the education of children is better and best accomplished by the parents than by a system. It's really that simple.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. So the other piece I would respond to what you said too was when the parent was telling you that they're getting money from the government and that's why they're so happy. Well, when you get money from the government, kind of like your analogy with food stamps, it's just an entitlement. So that's all the schooling becomes, is an entitlement. And so that's just way far off base from where we need to be as far as educating the children in our country.
Yeah.
So this has been a great conversation. And just to close up the school choice piece of it, the thing that I always like to tell people, and I'm sure you do too, I heard you refer to this, is that if we put government money into private and home schools, we will destroy them. Because as you suggested, they will end up having to compromise eventually. And believe me, that's what the government would love more than anything, is to control all education. So we have to
Yeah.
warn the private schools not to take the money. And the homeschoolers, I think, are already wise enough. I know some of them have fallen prey to the school choice idea of gaining money, but
Oh,
many of
yeah.
them, and I think HSLDA is opposed to it. I'm going to have Will Estrada on the show soon to talk more about that.
This is the Trojan horse. This horse is packed with government funds, and if we let it in the gates, we will surrender Troy. If that's
Yes.
not too far an analogy for you.
No,
But
that's
look,
great. It's perfect.
so
So, Sam, you have some wonderful resources available for parents. I know you've authored more than one book, and there's lots of other good information. Tell our viewers where they can find that information.
well, I'm so glad you asked, and I love talking about the resources that I've created because I don't know that anybody else is doing this. So I'll start with my newest, which is Parents Guide to Homeschool. We talked a little bit about this. So this is actually a workbook, and I went through some of it with you guys, but you can see that there's a bunch of fill in the blank kind of things, because as a parent, you need to recalibrate the way you think about education, because the way you currently think about education, most likely, is completely informed with K through 12 indoctrination. And so once you take a step back and recalibrate the way you think about education, you will feel much more empowered to be the mentor, the navigator, the lead learner for your children. And that's the paradigm that we're looking for. We want these kids to be resilient learners, and you have all the capability of making that happen. Also, I should point out before I go any further that the education of a child is also the education of the adults around that child. And so if you pass that off to somebody else, you're missing out on what could be the greatest growth in your life, the greatest experiences of your life, because your child has so much to teach you that you're probably completely unaware of. Okay, so the other things that I will talk about quickly. This was my first book. They're Your Kids, or my first educational book, I should say. This is it's called An Inspirational Journey from Self-Doubter to Homeschool Advocate. I was the self-doubter. So this is a lot my story, and also an indictment of our public schools, or our government schools, as you like to call them. And so I wrote this book when I was homeschooling my kids, but people seem to love it because it gives them a glimpse into how I did it, and the mistakes that I made, and also the victories that I had along the way. And then there's this one. This is called Teach from Love. It's a school year devotional for families. And I wrote this because we don't focus on virtues in our culture anymore. The schools don't teach them, but they are the most important thing. And so I wrote this. It covers 2 virtues every week, with very short stories, a little prayer, a scripture verse, and open-ended questions, because you ought to be having conversations with your children, not lectures. That's why you're not the teacher, you're the mentor. You have open-ended conversations. So these are open-ended questions meant to encourage interaction with your kids. And then every week I included a page for annotations. So you could write down the silly things that your kids say, because kids say amazing things, and you won't want to forget them. And so this book sells out every time I do a speaking engagement, because people love this book and word gets out and kids love it. I've had kids come up to me and say, I loved your book, because it encouraged them to think about the bigger issues, how to be adults, how to behave like adults, how to mature into adulthood through virtuous actions. And that's one of the most important things. So that's it. But I'll close with this one. This is the Playbook for Home Learning, which I created after a conference that I gave, or for a conference that I gave. So this comes with a series of videos if people are interested. I'm closing this book out. We're almost done with it, sold out. So if you're interested, you probably want to act sooner rather than later. But it is on closeout, and it's available with all the videos, so that you can follow along, because it's also a workbook. I'm very big into the exchange of ideas as opposed to the lecturing of ideas, even though I know on this podcast I lectured a lot. That's just the way it goes. But I encourage parents, please do not surrender your children on the sacrificial altar of our government schools. It's not worth it. It's not a good trade.
This has been a great conversation, Sam. Thank you for being on the show and for everything you're doing to help shape the future of our nation and get us back on the right track. I certainly would appreciate you coming back, and we'll talk more about some other issues that we didn't even get around to today. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. Please go to sorbostudios.com for all the information about home education, anything that you need.
Yes, please. I encourage you to do that. Sam has some great resources. So we thank everybody for listening to us and supporting our work. Join me again next week for another exciting episode of Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit coalition dedicated to restoring local control of education and parental authority. By empowering parents to reclaim responsibility for their children's learning and encouraging states to move away from federal influence, USPIE seeks to create a culture where parents are the primary decision makers in education and schools support families without the burden of federal mandates. If you want to start a state or regional USPIE chapter in your area, please visit uspie.org and complete the brief questionnaire in the chapters section.